Greetings and welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. This documentary will teach about the true history of the pole dance, and it will also use syncretism to tie together symbolism and sacred geometry that will reveal how it relates to ancient cosmology, Kundalini, the great mother goddess, and more. It will also reveal how Malakam, aka the pole dance, started off as innocent and spiritual, and how and why it became corrupted over time, becoming today's topless taboo. Pole dancing is a sport. It's a form of art, a fitness activity, a form of dance and eroticism. Hundreds of thousands of people take up pole dancing as a hobby every single day. Pole dancing fitness classes are available in all major cities, and it's more popular now than it's ever been before, but you can trace the history of pole dancing back for hundreds of years. Pole dancing has a unique and interesting story. As a sport, it has traveled around the world, been performed by men and women of all ages, and been used within the sex industry. The use of poles in acrobatic entertainment can be traced back to over 800 years ago in India. Both Malakam and Chinese pole originated in India. Malakam is a traditional Indian sport that uses a wooden pole, typically performed by men. They would perform acrobatic and yoga-inspired tricks on the pole. The poles used in Malakam were made from wood and much wider than a modern dance pole. Malakam is the oldest form of recorded performance that used vertical poles as apparatus. Like modern pole dancing, it requires a serious amount of strength, agility, and stamina to perform. Chinese pole performances often had two poles, up to 20 feet high, and the performers would perform climbs, inversions, and would also leap between the two poles. The poles used for Chinese pole are silicone or powder coated, allowing the performer to complete their routines fully clothed. As you can see, both Malakam and Chinese pole use similar techniques to what you do in your own pole fitness training. In the USA, pole dancing became synonymous with traveling sideshows. People would visit these events to experience exotic dancing from around the world, including belly dancing from the Middle East and pole dancing from Asia. At the time, dancers in these shows were often Ghawazi dancers from Egypt. By the 1920s, dancers would entice paying customers into shows by dancing sexually or gyrating their bodies against the pole. Due to the sexual nature of the dancers' movements, pole dancing and burlesque shows were often combined before making the natural move from circus tents into bars. Pole dancing performed by women became widely associated with strip clubs and the adult industry. Strippers and dancers in strip clubs all over the world use a pole to show off their skills, and tricks performed in strip clubs were often erotic in nature. However, during this time, more athletic and acrobatic tricks were combined into pole dance and striptease routines. Pole dancing became associated with attractive women dancing in their underwear with high-heeled shoes and men putting dollar bills into her bikini bottoms. There was certainly a lot of curiosity around pole dancing as a fitness activity, inspired by the dancers who used more acrobatic tricks in their performance routines. During the 1990s, pole dancing was specifically taught as an art and a form of fitness for the first time. It remained an alternative form of fitness before gaining mainstream popularity. Pole dancing for fitness classes started to gain popularity in America, Europe, and Australia. It continued to be performed in sexualized settings such as strip clubs and bars, but more credibility was given to the athletic ability of performers. From the mid-2000s onwards, pole dancing for fitness began reaching peak popularity. Pole fitness classes are offered in most major cities. These classes are held in gyms and dance studios, as well as continuing to be performed in strip clubs. We read that at a certain point in history, pole dancing was taught as fitness for the first time. But the truth is that Malakam, in its original conception, always embodied the acrobatic and fitness element. In a lot of regions where Malakam is practiced normal in society, obesity is almost non-existent. The populations tend to live longer and age slower. Practitioners of Malakam tend to be more leaner, more flexible, and when it comes to workloads, far more efficient than the average Westerner. In the Western world, bad health habits are promoted as the norm, while habits that could improve our health are often ridiculed. The indigenous people of the Americas would have definitely highlighted the practice of Malakam as a cultural benchmark. Malakam was also common in Southeast Asia and India. It can be seen as an extension of yoga, and it is also a norm in most forms of Hinduism. One way we can see the history of the pole dance in the Americas is the totem pole dance that were practiced by the indigenous people on this land. They would perform Malakam around wooden totem poles. In antiquity, all practitioners of Malakam used wooden poles. Pole dance in America has its roots in the Little Egypt traveling sideshows of the 1890s, which featured sensual hoochie-coochie belly dances performed mostly by Gawazi dancers making their first appearance in America. In an era where women dress modestly in corsets, the dancers dressed in short skirts and richly adorned in jewelry caused quite a stir. During the 1920s, dancers introduced pole by sensually gyrating on the wooden tent poles to attract crowds. So now we're about to get into the transitioning of Malakam from something spiritual into its infusion with the rock and roll and pop culture invasion of the 1950s. The rock and roll invasion in the 1950s saw the introduction of the pole to a wider audience with Elvis Presley's Jailhouse Rock movie and video in 1957. The video featured Presley's famous gyrating hips as well as numerous pole slides, grinds, and twirls. Eventually, the pole dancing moved from tents to bars and combined with burlesque dance. Since the 1980s, pole dancing has incorporated athletic moves such as climbs, spins, and inversions into striptease routines, first in Canada and then in the United States. By the time Malakam found its way back to the Americas, the indigenous people of America would be reintroduced to the practice in a degraded form. And since they lacked their true history, they will never know it by its true origins as Malakam, but only by its downgraded form. What's left of this ancient practice of Malakam in the Western world can be seen all around us in the form of strip bars and topless clubs and etc. Right now what we're uncovering is the degradation of Malakam and showing how it transitioned from a cultural and spiritual practice that came with very high physical health benefits into a more secular practice used to entertain, capitalize off the exploitation of female sexuality, and give rise to what would become the femme or drag queens of today. In order to fully understand this transition, we have to learn about the Gawazis. The Gawazi is a local practice describing female dancers who dance in return of money. Meanwhile, the men version of the practice is described as Kawali. They first started as few Egyptian gypsies who refused to dance for free, unlike the common habit among all Egypt. Then the idea got extensively practiced and got developed among rural Egyptians or fellaheen, who also developed a more rural and traditional style accompanied by rural Egyptian songs and colorful dresses of the fellaheen and became a theme of rural Egypt. Over the years, Upper Egyptians mastered and then developed a different style of traditional side-eye dancing that's accompanied by Egyptian mizmar flute and kina and Asuid's traditional female clothing of teli, a super silky type of local fabric. That Upper Egyptian style is the most famous, where the dancer is accompanied by a traditional Upper Egyptian mizmar and a singer singing and narrating folk songs in Side-Eye Arabic about local heroes and popular love stories in towns. While the performative and traditional raqs shaki in urban Egypt was more classical and influenced by more formal and classical Western styles such as classical ballet or Latin American dance, the term Gawazi in Egypt refers to the dancers in rural Egypt who have preserved the traditional 18th to 19th century style. The Arabic word Gawazi means conqueror, as Gayiza is said to conquer the hearts of her audience. They were also known as Awalim, but in Egypt, Awalim are the traditional Egyptian dancers and singers of the city, not rural areas, who used to perform in respectable events such as the weddings and festivities of notable people. Both terms are 19th century euphemisms for erotic dancer. Ameh literally means learned woman and came to be used as a replacement for Gazaya after the Gawazi were legally banned in 1834. And Almea originally was a courtesan in Egyptian culture, a woman educated to sing and recite classical poetry and to discourse. After the Gawazi were banned, they were forced to pretend that they were in fact Awalim. The term Almea was introduced in French Orientalism as Almea and used synonymously with belly dancer. In 1834, the Gawazi were banished from Cairo to Upper Egypt by Muhammad Ali. Initially, the Gawazi were a very small group who got banished because of their low-class dancing. By the time the term didn't refer to them, but mainly became a general term for any dancers, as it included all the traditional and folk dances of rural and Upper Egyptians, mainly featuring mizmars and heavy bass lines and other traditional Egyptian music in the background. Beginning in the first half of the 19th century, descriptions and depictions of Gawazi dancers became famous in European Orientalism, and the style was described as danse de ventre or belly dance from the 1860s. The first Gawazis performed unveiled in the streets. Rapid hip movement and use of brass finger cymbals, hand castanets, characterized their dance. Musicians of their tribe usually accompanied them in their dance. They usually wore kohl around their eyes and henna on their fingers, palms, toes, and feet. The Gawazi performed in the court of a house or in the street before the door on certain occasions of festivity in the harem. They were never admitted into a respectable harem, but were frequently hired to entertain a party of men in the house of some rake. Both women and men enjoyed their entertainment. However, many people who were more religious or of the higher classes disapproved of them. Many people liked the dancing of the Gawazi, but felt it was improper because of its being danced by women who should not expose themselves in this manner. Because of this, there was a small number of young male performers called Qawwals. The Qawwals were Egyptian male traditional dancers who impersonated the women of the Gawazi in their dance. They were known to impersonate every aspect of the women, including their dance and use of castanets. The Qawwals were known of being gay, and wearing female clothes in daily life, hence why it was easy for them to occupy the scene. So people, what we just read was some of the early origins of what we would call the drag queen. And this is interesting because we're reading now what was going on in Cairo in Egypt under Muhammad Ali. Women were becoming independent, making their own economy based upon this form of dancing, keeping in mind that during this time it had already failed to a lower state because we went from some cultural and spiritual and healthy to just some use for these women to basically feed themselves, where it became practice in harems and different low-level places and settings of that nature. So what was going on in Egypt, they were ending this independency amongst women. When you look at Egypt today, the women are more controlled. They have to cover themselves. And a lot of that started right here in 1834 under Muhammad Ali. You no longer see a lot of the belly dancers and gawazis throughout Egypt today. The world has become more patriarchal and women are more reliant on government systems and men. Gawazi exists in the modern Western world as the strip culture, something controlled and industrialized and regulated by man, as opposed to its original conceptions being a more non-controlled, independent movement of groups of women. So I'm just giving you guys the history of it. I think all of this was by design of them banning the gawazis throughout the Western world and reintroducing it in a form of, like I said, a strip clubs. That way it can be industrialized and corporatized, and the people who capitalize off of the most are not the dancers. This was different in its original conception before it was industrialized. It also showed what we read, that when they started to ban the women, it was okay for the males to still practice gawazi, which is very weird and interesting, that at the same time they started to ban women gawazis, they start to put male gawazis or kawals on a pedestal. And if you ask me, this was like the origin of what we call the drag queen. See, everything we're reading now represent the corruption point, the turning point from spiritual to capitalism to secular and over-sexualized and exploitation of the woman. So a lot of these latter Gawazi groups that represent the turning point, a lot of them were of Moorish descent. And we know the Moors were known for the eunuchs, which were males who were what we would be called transgenders today. It was males who would have a procedure done to remove their phallus. Remember that the word Gazia or Gawazi means conqueror, and conqueror is a Spanish word. Remember the Spanish conquistadors. The word conquistador is another Spanish word for conqueror as well. These are related. The Moors would have been a group of people who would have been colonizers, and what they would have introduced was a very circus-like culture based upon entertainment and this corrupted form of Gawazi. The mutation of this corrupted form of Gawazi today can be seen in hip-hop and, like I said, the strip culture. It's the watered-down version, which takes away the true origins from us and only creates an industry that capitalizes off the exploitation of women. So at this time, we're going to go ahead and use syncretism and go ahead and tie together the symbolism to reveal how all of this relates to ancient cosmology, Kundalini, and the great mother goddess. So the image we're looking at right now is a wooden totem pole which would have been used in the indigenous Americas. And one of the first forms of Malakam, as I mentioned earlier, in this land that was practiced among our indigenous ancestors, they would have been dancing around the wooden totem pole here. Now, this wooden totem pole has two deities, and they're called a serpent and the eagle. And in most of these traditions, these were the two dominant animals, if not the only two on the pole, the serpent and the eagle. And that's very important when we get to talking about the Kundalini. So this represents balance. It's a Mesoamerican indigenous deity that would have been equivalent to the Egyptian Ma'at. And spreading the arms out represents balance. One of the dominant goddesses that personified the serpent was called the serpent goddess. We're going to talk about her later. The women back in these cultures would have all been experts at Malakam. And the deity that would have been worshipped in relation to that practice would have been various forms of the Great Mother. This is also related to ballerinas. To be a ballerina, you got to have balance. And Ma'at represents balance. The goddess you're looking at now represents balance. This is a form of the serpent goddess. She's in the position of a ballerina. How they're able to stand on their tippy toes and spin around all lies in the positioning that we see here, as well as many other factors in skill. But as you can see, all of these pre-dynastic goddesses were basically personifying balance. This became the first arts on the earth in the form of ballerina and things that we competed to make our bodies balance. And that's how we lead back to this practice of Malakam. Here's a goddess called Amma in the Dogon culture. She's the oldest deity to the Dogon and Pygmy. And what we want to pay attention to is her pose, how she's positioned. She's positioned that way to show balance. You can see these scales on each of her sides to show that she is balanced. Neither of those scales is tilted. So when you compare her to the stripper here, which it takes great balance to be able to do what she's doing, you compare that to this image, to this image, and to this image, which goes back to the totem pole. Balance was the foundation of all ancient spiritual systems. And balance in all aspects of life is what transforms one into a master. Balance physically, balance mentally, balance spiritually, and etc. That's what these deities represented and what they manifested within the pre-dynastic social structure based upon the practices that was embodied in the spiritual system. Let's talk more about it. Now we're looking at tightrope walkers. And in order for you to be a tightrope walker, you definitely got to have tremendous skill and balance. Let's take this girl, for example. What the ancestors was trying to teach in their spiritual system was how to manifest balance in all aspects of life and in all parts of what it means to be a human. And they had spiritual practices and sports that will allow one to achieve that. This takes physical balance, but it also takes mental balance. And you know what? It also takes spiritual balance to get over your fears of heights and all of that. Because some of these people are so skilled, they do this without a net. And if they fall, they die. So that's definitely takes spiritual balance, okay, and physical balance. And listen, mental balance as well. So you're perfecting that trinity of a human and just practicing this one sport of tightroping. You're doing the same thing with ballerina. You're doing the same thing with malakam. Now let's pay attention to the sacred geometry, because we still want to keep in mind that we're dealing with Ma'at. And if you know anything about the goddess Ma'at, she's an Egyptian goddess that represents balance, and she has her wings spread just like the tightrope balancing bar, which would be equivalent of the wings, which gives one balance. This is what it all represents. Once a bird learns how to balance the flapping of its wings, that's when it learns how to fly and take flight. So let's look at the sacred geometry of the woman with the pole, because we want to tie this into the stripper. The woman on the pole is a very ancient symbol. She's represented by the eagle at the top of the totem pole. What I want you to realize is when you look at this stripper on a pole, this would have been synonymous with the great mother of the North Pole. So in ancient cosmology, you have this flat earth system. And in that flat earth system, you have all of these worlds surrounding other worlds. We're not really here today to talk flat earth. I just want to show you how the symbolism connects to balance, even on a cosmic level. In the middle of the ancient cosmology is a pole, and that pole balances out everything in creation. It balances out all the elements. It renews everything. So the pole in the middle of this cosmology was personified by a great mother, and that great mother danced around the pole. Here is Dogon cosmology. Again, you see the great mother, and there would have been a pole going through her, and she would spin around like a ballerina. And as she spun around, it would stir up the elements and recycle everything on earth. So if you look at this image, in the middle of this would have been a pole, and that would have been a goddess dancing around that pole, and as she danced, she was stirring the ether. This was one personification of cosmology, a woman dancing around a pole. That woman became to be known as the serpent goddess, and in the Bible, she was a serpent wrapped around a tree. As you can see here, the goddess is represented by the serpent, and the pole, or the North Pole, as you can see here, she's wrapped around it. This became the modern symbol for money. So the serpent goddess wrapped around a pole is what scientists call the Birkeland current in today's modern science. It's a tornado type energy at the North Pole that's responsible for recycling the elements. And I'm giving you ancient cosmology right now. What you want to think about when you look at this tornado is a invisible pole in the middle with all of the energy being spiraled around it. The vortex is invisible. It's in the middle. It's represented by the eye right here. If you're inside of that, you're basically protected. So if you were to go in the middle of a tornado, you would reach a grounding point where it'll be the most peaceful place on earth. That's the irony. It's a paradox. What we're looking at as destructive is the outer parts of it, which is the energy flowing around the stable pole in the middle. So stable that when you get in the middle of it, like I say, it's peaceful. So you can translate this tornado into symbolism. You can put a pole that represents the stable pole right here, which is that grounding point, peaceful point. And around that pole, you can wrap serpents or spirals to represent the energy recycling around it, hot and cold, because that's what's making a tornado. Cold wind and hot wind, and it creates a vortex. Adam and Eve. And you can translate this in the form of a tornado. You see, the tornado is dealing with the torus field, tornado. And we're going to talk about this because it's dealing with the cosmology. The ancient cosmology was that of a torus field. And I can show you what that looked like here. This is an electromagnetic torus field. This is ancient flat earth cosmology. Surrounding this would be a bunch of more of these eggs within eggs layered like an onion. But this shows you the negative and positive, hot and cold, sun and moon meeting up, creating this huge tornado at the middle of the earth. And that's where all the compasses point. All the compasses point there. All of our compasses is pointing to a huge tornado at the center of the earth. But this thing is actually recycling all of the elements of creation, even the light, because light can't escape a black hole. So what's going on at the North Pole is what we witnessed during a tornado on a very, very macro, massive level beyond your comprehension. You would actually have to go to witness this miracle, which is what many ancients did. So when you see at the top of the tornado, it starts to spread out, because what's happening here, the tornado is basically a neuron. A neuron is a connection point. It transfers energy from one dimension to the next based upon these two connection points. So when we look at a tornado, we're looking at the top half of a neuron connecting to the sky and the bottom part connecting to the ground, spreading out. So it looks like a hourglass or a dumbbell, if you will, or a capital I. And a tornado is basically a neuron. It's transferring energy from the atmosphere into the earth, into the ground. It's charging the earth and the ground in the area via the sky. But since the sky needs a connection point to the ground, the need for a neuron is necessary to connect these two dimensions, that they can transfer energy from each other and charge each other. This is cosmic science that's revealed also in the flat earth model here. As you can see, there's a huge neuron at the middle of our earth, connecting our world to other worlds below. And it's a huge chain of neurons on a vertical pole, creating what they call Jack's beanstalk, where each world is skewered together, feeding the nets. And we're going to talk about that later. So when we look at the concept of the serpent goddess with her staff, now we should have a better understanding. It represents balance. When the patriarchs took over, they corrupted all of this symbolism. When we look at the stripper on a pole, it's a direct manifestation of modern corruption of an ancient spiritual practice called Malakam. The image that I'm showing of the stripper on a pole right now would have been a revered image. This image that you see on the screen right now is equivalent to this image. It's representing balance. This is a Greek interpretation of the serpent goddess holding her staff. All of the women in the ancient world prior to the modern corruption of Malakam would have embodied the energies of the serpent goddess. By practicing Malakam, the woman spent most of her life holding the pole, being fit and lean. We practice meditation. We were a different type of human. We live longer. So this image have been corrupted today, and when most people see it, they just think of a topless dancer. Images like what you see on the screen in antiquity would have been equivalent to images like what you see here, and many more all over the ancient world where you had the serpent goddess holding the staff. But when you look at this image of a stripper on a pole, all of the knowledge that I'm giving you has been hidden, and it's just been turned into strip club industries today. We don't practice Malakam in its true state. They actually desecrated this image that you see on the screen, and it became the witch on the broomstick. The whole concept of a witch on a broomstick was Westerners, when they first came in contact with our ancestors, they didn't know nothing about Malakam. And when they enslaved us, they cursed the practice. And Western fitness is more of a bodybuilding type structure that's promoting protein and building muscle and just becoming stiff and big. In ancient fitness, it was yoga-based, Malakam, lean and flexible, like water, like Bruce Lee. Back in the old days, they was on a witch hunt. They were burning women at the stake. They were getting rid of this practice of Malakam, at the same time re-indoctrinating us with new religions, new diets, and everything, new practices. The practice of Malakam became desecrated in mythology as the witch on a broomstick. It said that the witch worked her magic with the broom. It's what allowed her to fly. But when you really read between the lines, what allowed her to fly is the pole. It's that simple. It's basically desecrating the practice of Malakam. When you see the woman on the pole, you can even see that in the Dogon religion right here. This is Dogon spirituality. This would have been their form of the serpent goddess. Why is she raising her hands? For balance. Now, the only time we do this now is in hip hop concerts. All of this stuff been desecrated and reduced. Here is a patriarchal form of the god El, Lord of the Rings, showing you the same thing. Balance. Balance. Remember, the rings represent the cosmology that I just showed you. Each of the worlds surrounding the pole. Here is a Hindu conception. And that pole would have had a goddess dancing around it, stirring up the ether. Around that pole, you would have had a goddess and a god dancing around that pole, male and female, sun and moon, giving us night and day, stirring up the ether. When you deal with electromagnetism, red shift and blue shift translates to night and day in reality. There's something called a barber pole that we see today. The barber shops used to be spiritual places back in the day, and Berbers were spiritual people. That's why when you go to the barber shop, normally you would talk to the barber and he would be almost a mental counselor as well. Those days are gone though. But when you look at the barber pole, the colors red and blue is dealing with sun and moon, night and day, and the white is dealing with that grounding point, that neutral point. That's what's really spinning it around. When I showed you the tornado earlier, that's that point in the middle that represents zero. The cold air represents blue and the warm air represents red. This is what's happening at the North Pole. And this science was personified by the woman dancing around the pole. When you look at the Bible with Adam and Eve around the tree of life, is no different than looking at this image or the barber pole that I just showed. The barber pole, the red and blue, is Adam and Eve. The white represent the tree of life or the serpent goddess. That's what we're dealing with here. It's a lot of ways the ancestors personified this. So if you look at this image and look at this image, again, you can see night and day going around the North Pole. So when you get right down to it on a micro level, this energy translates to DNA. Each strand represents night and day, sun and moon, one from mama, one from daddy. And they're in a vibration around a central axis. That's you. You're the pole. And these two polarities is all going around your true essence. That's represented by the influence of your mother and your father, which is in your DNA code. That didn't make you who you are. It will influence who you become. Who you are is embodied in your true essence, your soul energy. That's before you even came through parents. That's why the Bible said the sins of the father will be visited upon the child. We here to perfect the DNA. So the mistakes of your mama and daddy, when the child don't make them, it corrects the DNA and repairs it for that generation. Just to get back on topic. So again, here we see the serpent goddess with her staff. We can see the serpent goddess here wrapped around the pole. We can see the serpent goddess here on the pole, which is modern symbolism dealing with the stripper. And here we see other corruptions of this symbolism in the form of the witch on a broom. Here we just have another conception of the serpent goddess to the Mayans. And when you compare that to the female on the pole, you can see how it represents balance. The colors associated with the serpent goddess was green, and that's how we get the symbol for money today. And I'll be showing you a collage to lock that symbolism into your mind in a second. To tie all of this in with Malakam, let's go here. Here we're dealing with balance. One thing that you will notice when dealing with Malakam, there's no way that you can suspend yourself at the top of the totem without spreading your arms for balance. If he were to drop his arms right now, he would fall. He wouldn't be able to balance. This is basically the science of flight. It shows us how to fly in the astral realm. This is the same concept of tightrope walking. Instead of her spreading her arms, they use a pole because she would need more of an extension when it comes to tightrope walking. But I'm showing you all this to show you how all of it is related. When you look at this totem, this would be the serpent goddess at the top. She had the body of a serpent, but the head of an eagle. So in a lot of cultures, she became to be known as the phoenix, because even though she had the body of a serpent, she had the top head of a bird or eagle. That's Ma'at, the top head. The fact that she got wings, you got to remember this. Snakes don't got wings, okay? Snakes don't got wings, all right? This goddess, in her consistent depiction, would have had a bird head with a snake body. And that's how we get this totem pole of the serpent and the eagle. At the top of the Mayan cosmos, they have the sacred eagle. We have that same sacred eagle on our money, and the money is green. It's the same symbol of the serpent goddess. So let's talk a little bit about currency, because there's a natural current coming from the North Pole represented by the trident in the middle of this cosmology. And as you can see, the sacred bird on top of it, that trident is a cosmic totem pole. So all of our ancestors had totem pole rituals, like I explained earlier, Malakam. At the middle of the earth is a cosmic totem pole. So the totem poles that we build in our villages and in our cultures are just miniature representations of this celestial totem that's at the middle of the earth, and it's giving off a signal and a current. And that current is the natural vibration of the earth, and it's responsible for, like I said, recycling the elements. Is also responsible for distributing the resources throughout the earth terrarium. So when you turn this cosmology into a spiritual system, you get statements like as above, so below, meaning that when we distribute resources in our own lands, we should distribute them equally as well in order to keep balance. That's what the earth is doing. It's distributing everything equally from this central axis. And we supposed to practice that in our civilizations, distributing the resources equally in our societies. And when we don't, then the natural order is compromised, and that's where we at today. But when you look at this cosmology, this is ancient Mayan cosmology. It go back to what I was saying about the totem. You got the stripper on the pole, and her legs is wrapped around the pole. She's keeping her arms spread outward to maintain balance. And in order for her to hold this position, she gotta keep an arch at the base of her spine. And we're gonna talk about that later when we get into Kundalini. For now, let's finish up the cosmology. As you can see, you got the sacred bird at the top. Like I was telling y'all previously, the goddess would have had the head of a bird and the body of a serpent. As you can see, the serpent wrapped around the tree there. So the bird at the top, the serpent around the pole. We're gonna talk more about that here in a minute. What we want to point out here is the fact that that serpent represents a sine wave. Remember, the natural current of Earth. Without that current, there would be no life. That current is what scientists are calling the Birkeland current today. But it's represented by a sine wave, and the one way the ancestors personified that was by this serpent. When the goddess move her waist, she's working the base of the spine. That's where the Kundalini energy originate. And likewise, the earth is a huge goddess, and at the North Pole, where you reach the base of the spine, you get this vibration, this gyration, producing a current that's stirring up the ether. This is the dance of life, literally. As you see in this collage, how on the left, all of this symbolism was plagiarized and turned into Christianity and different patriarch religions of the modern world. As you can see, the totem pole, the Mayan cosmology, and the serpent goddess right there, just so you can tie it all together in your mind. The serpent goddess is moving her tail to sort of swim or move. This sort of snake gyration is that sine wave that I'm telling you about. That symbolizes life. That's what you see in the hospital when you're alive. So as you can see in this Mayan cosmology, right where the serpent's goddess tail would be, you have the serpent. And where her wings would be, you have the sacred bird of heaven. This is what's producing the current of life. So when we talk about current, today that translates to currency. Before money, we didn't rely on currency. We relied simply on this current at the center of the earth. We relied directly on Mother Nature. We didn't have monetary systems. So currency was directly related to this current that sustains all life on earth. before they created a medium in between humans and the resources that we need to sustain ourselves. That medium is money. So on the money, you have this eye of a serpent deity. That's a patriarchal form of this serpent goddess. That would be the devil today. But back in the day before money, it was the diva, the great mother. There was no monetary systems. Just people distributing natural resources evenly, equally, and doing equal trade and equal business. Money corrupted the world. It put a medium in between us and the resources and the land. So current became currency, but you still can see the symbolism here. The woman wrapping her body around the pole in Malakam is a spiritual dance related to this serpent goddess. When the serpent goddess is dancing around the pole, she's creating that current. Likewise, when the stripper is dancing around the pole, she's creating currency, money. She's making it rain. When you take that back to the old world, these type of dances, what they call the Indian dances to make it rain, wasn't for money, but it was for, like I said previously, natural resources, crops, herbs. There was no monetary systems. So we seeing how our terminology and spiritual systems became corrupted, and how they still show themselves in our modern society in these corrupted forms. But something you guys may have not paid attention to, it's a consistency with all of these goddesses. What is it, Brother Sanchez? All of their boobs are out. They're not wearing shirts or bras, but their boobs are out. And why am I pointing that out? Because we're focusing on the syncretism here. This is the whole concept behind the topless dancer. Remember, when we talk about how women embody the attributes of the serpent goddess today, it's been downgraded. So when you go to the topless bars, the whole concept of the woman being topless all goes back to the great mother. All of the great mothers were topless. And it's to revere the breast. Even if you look at this collage, all right, all of the goddesses you see are topless. This is the concept of the topless dancer. One breast is the sun, one breast is the moon. The whole concept of a breast is dealing with cosmology itself. Because when you look at this Mayan cosmology in the top right corner, all the energy that we use in the cosmos is pulled from the nipple. Right there where we see the sacred bird. And that's where a baby will pull its energy. And you can even look at this like the nipple at the top of a battery where we pull energy from that. So the concept of breast worship all lies in what I'm telling you here. And so we see the goddesses topless to revere the breast. And we see that the earth itself shaped like a giant breast. So I wanted to go more in detail and point out a little bit more syncretism with Malakam and ancient cosmology. So if you look at the routine that they're forming right now, it's not nothing that they just stumbled across. There's ancient wisdom embedded in this art form. The way they're able to even out all the energy ain't random. They're using their bodies to reconstruct the earth's cosmology, which is stable, as above, so below. And if they can do that, then they can build a stable structure with themselves. And that's how they're able to do this. That's the deeper aspect, the underlying cosmic wisdom that explains the quote unquote physics behind it. Now let's check out the sacred geometry and compare it to this. Here you can see we have Christ And the reason I'm pointing this out is because nothing is random. When you look at the sacred geometry here, it's dealing with flat earth cosmology with the dome and the great vault with the eagle at the top. So remember the Mayan cosmology that I showed you with the serpent wrapped around the pole and the eagle at the top of the dome. Christ represents that eagle. A way they showed that in modern Christianity was with a white dove instead of an eagle or a sacred bird, because it ain't necessarily an eagle. The Mayan call it a sacred bird. And that bird can be your nation's bird. Every nation got their own sacred bird, every state. It changes throughout the times. But I'm just showing you the cosmology here. And you can compare that to this right here. And you can see we dealing with the same thing. Let's check out some more. Everybody know this famous image. But the strength that it shows in unity, all of these guys holding the flag up, it has a cosmic connection, as you can see here. This is ancient cosmology once again. And in this, it goes back to what I was saying. All of the lower worlds being support systems for the upper worlds, and the energy getting lighter and lighter as we go upward, just like we see on Earth. The higher up we go, the elements become less dense, and the further down we go, the more dense they become and more spread out they become. Here's another interpretation of it. And here are ways we can see this same symbolism in Malakam. So here's another concept of these worlds stacked upon each other. And just to show the science behind that, here are ring magnets stacked upon each other. And the reason I'm showing that is because this ties into the whole Earth cosmology of the ancients. Is dealing with electromagnetism, and later I'm going to show you how these ring magnets each correspond to a different color chakra up the spinal cord. So you can look at each of these colorful rings as different colors of light vibrational energy wrapping around your spinal cord, which is the pole, the black pole. So the black pole is the spinal cord, and the different rings are the chakras. Each chakra creates a different version of you in a different ether. And we're going to also get into the multiverse in relationship with the human chakra layers. So the truth about the story of Jesus leaving the earth is really telling the story of astral travel. It's the ability to go out of the body and into other ethereal bodies. Jesus, with his hands on the cross, dying, that death isn't literal. It's talking about a meditative death. A guru in a temple that leaves their body to travel the astral realm and other bodies and other realities. That is a form of death. It's all about being out of the body. So death is not a stranger to the one who meditates, because they always go out of their body. So Christ leaving the earth and coming back, and them calling it the death and rebirth, is what the meditating guru do every time they astral travel. And so Jesus' arms is spread because we're dealing with flight. Jesus left the earth. But this is a corrupted form coming from a people who tried to hide the secrets of astral travel and out of body. So Jesus was on a wooden pole, a totem pole. Remember that. The Christian cross is shaped just like the ancient totem pole. It's a wooden pole. When you see Jesus on that wooden pole, you got to think about Malakam. The Europeans corrupted this spiritual system. This would be Jesus on a wooden pole with his arms out. I can show you other forms here. This is called the Sky Woman to the indigenous people of Mesoamerica. And as you can see, this would be like their version of the sky goddess Nut over the North Pole. And you can see the pole is at the base of the spine. You got to aim that pole at the base of the spine. We learn that in meditation that the Kundalini energy originates from the base of the spine. And once it starts flowing up the spine, it flows up the spine like dual serpents, making a number 8 or DNA type strand. And these negative and positive energies are now balanced out. And when we're not meditating, the energies are not balanced, and we can't achieve this out of body state. So when the gurus go into deep meditation, they balancing them energies at the base of the spine. As those energies ascend, it allow them to take flight out of the body into the ethereal realm. That's why when you get to the top of the pole, the wings are spread. But in order for him to suspend himself, he gotta be connected to that wood pole via the base of the spine, where you see it making contact with his body. That's the grounding point, the silver lining, the anchoring point to keep us grounded to earth in this body. Once he fall off of that, he fall back to the ground, to earth. That'll be like you flying right in the astral realm. You traveling the ethers, you're lucid, and you're exploring the universe in these alternate realities, right? And then you break your consciousness and you lose flight. You fall back here to earth. Consciousness fall back into your body that was meditating in your bedroom or either in the temple. That's what happens when the connection point at the base of his spine that's connected to that pole is compromised, and he falls back to the earth. So that's the reason she was called a Sky Woman. She's traveling the astral realm. She's showing the secrets of us taking flight into the astral realm. So the concept of the man or the bird hovering over the wooden pole was corrupted in ancient Egypt. And we get this image. I chose this image because it took the penis off of it. I don't want to get my channel flag for no reason at all, so I used a more friendly image here. But we know in the original art, you would have Osiris's penis sticking up, and a bird would be landing on top of that penis. This is a corrupted form of the man on top of the wooden pole. See, this is why we say today when males get aroused, in certain regions they say he got a wood, and they call it morning wood. But the reason they refer to the male penis as a wood is when all of this spiritual knowledge became corrupted by the Greeks and the Egyptians and turned into phallus worship. So there go your bird on the wood or your man on the wood. And here is another form of it in the Mayan cosmos. Your concept of the dove landing on the cross. So today we get this story of Jesus on top of Mount Calvary. But don't you know that a cavalry is a unit of men? That's why I'm showing you this image right here, brothers and sisters. Make sure you hit the like button, because y'all know I go deep with my research. Like I said, a man at the top always got to spread his arms or assume some type of pose of the cosmic bird in order to maintain balance up there. He also got to be fairly light. Your heavy ones at the bottom, your light people at the top. That's how the earth stacks the elements. It's called a law of density. But the dude at the top represent that sacred bird hovering above the earth with all the people of the earth. So you can see this in the British Royal Beehive. See, in this famous image right here, you notice all the men are forming a pyramid. And all of these men are heavier than the flag, but they're serving as the foundation for it. That would be like the earth with the sacred eagle at the top. It's the same thing we looking at in this symbolism. Instead of having a guy at the top or wings spread or a sacred bird, you have a sacred flag. The flag represents the sacred bird. The flag represents the ether and the dome, or what we call the stars and the stripes, because the stripes are the ley lines, the magnetic ley lines that form the torus field. And the stars, of course, self-explanatory. But when you look at Malakam, the plagiarized form of it in the Western world can be seen in images like what I'm showing now, or images like this. Because the reason Jesus was on Mount Calvary, a cavalry is a group of men. And that was the Christians' way of plagiarizing these different Malakam routines in artwork. So when we talk about Kundalini, this type of artwork ties into that as well with the syncretism. Like I said, a flag at the top is synonymous of the sacred bird, and the sacred bird translates to the crown chakra when we deal with Kundalini. So the crown chakra is where the energy starts to become light and filtered. You're basically stripping yourself through the layers. Each chakra layer that we see around the body is a different version of you in an alternate reality. And as your consciousness alternate through these different versions, it's stripping through the layers. It's ripping through the layers, one to the next. And the reason I'm using the word strip is because that's what this documentary all started with. The strippers, right? The way the stripper move on the pole, the way she gyrates, it's the secrets of how the energy flow up the spine. The way the woman moves around the pole is symbolic of how the energy moves around the spine when we meditate. And when we do that, we're able to strip through the chakra layers. So the concept of the stripper, the serpent goddess being the one that strips the veil from over the eyes. So the way the stripper moves her body can be seen by this hourglass shape in the middle. She gyrates and fluctuates, and she starts this from the base of the spine. So if you look right here, this little empty area can be seen is where the Kundalini is generated up and down the spine for us to take off. It's like a rocket. The rocket got to push down with force energy or thrust energy in order to push upward, to fly upward to its destination. That's what's happening here. That's what's happening here. But the way this hyperboloid reciprocates is that of a stripper gyrating on a pole. And this is why we talk about the woman shaping like an hourglass, and she's moving her waist like a serpent, starting at the base of the spine. This is dealing with Kundalini. And this strips the veil from over our eyes as we travel through the layers of these different realities. Again, here go the chakra layers. And the way the energy flows up and down the spine is represented by the serpent, as you can see here. And when it finally reaches its destination, bursting out the top of the crown, that's how we get the symbolism of the sacred bird. You've now got wings. You've taken flight. Represented right here by the feather at the top of the head that the Indians wore. That feather at the top of the head that the Indians wore is symbolic of this flag and this artwork. I'm showing you how they plagiarized it all. Your body shapes like a triangle with the flag at the top. Now, if you look at this artwork, you get the same thing. Each of these men are really the same man. They tell this same story with Vishnu. It's the alternate versions of yourself split up on each ether. The stripes represent right here different versions of yourself on different realms. That's what the stripes represent, the chakra layers. And the stars is represented by the chakras themselves. So your stars and stripes are your chakras and chakra layers. And what it will look like is this right here, all of the layers. And that would be that feather at the top, turning, giving you flight. Stars and stripes waving in the wind, taking flight. So there you go. Each of your chakra layers are different versions of the self. When I see routines like this, I start to think about balance, and I start to think about structure. I start to think about density. They will have to form this by making sure the man that can hold on the strongest is at the top. If they got the weak man at the top, his arms gonna give out, and it's gonna be a domino effect when he fall. They got the man with the weakest arms at the bottom. They got an order going. That's the way the earth stacked the elements, like I was saying earlier. So when I look at these kind of routines, I think about how our chakra layers are stacked with the heaviest energies at the bottom in the underworlds. So I can't help but think of the ring magnets when I see this. So it's said that the balancing of these polarizing energies at the base of the spine will allow one to split themselves from the base reality, allowing them access into the multiverse, being able to take flight in astral travel. And the reason I got the electricity wise there is because we're dealing with the consciousness, which is electric energy spiraling up and down the pole, which was represented by the Great Mother or the Dogon Kanunga. It's showing you that neuron concept that I brought up earlier, how both of these energies come together in you. The energy from the underworld is ascending upward, and it's calling around your spinal cord. This would be the lower self. And the energy of the higher self is descending downward, and they're calling around the spinal cord. And this is what they call the angel and the demon influencing your reality. When you're able to balance these two and get them in unison, that's how you're able to split and go into this astral state. This is the true knowledge of the Christ, because Christ was simply an astral traveler. So the concept of being put to death on a wooden cross predate Christ. It goes back to the first wooden cross, which was the wooden totem that we see here. So the concept of being put to death on the wood or the wooden cross, it predates Christ. The wooden cross is the Great Mother, or a representation of the tree of life, as we can see here in the top right corner. A tree basically shaped like a cross and is wooden. All of our ancient rituals, we use wooden crosses and wooden totems, like what we see here to represent the Great Mother. Now, when you look at that totem pole, you're looking at a goddess called a Phoenix goddess. She's the same thing as the serpent goddess. Remember, she's the top half, the bird half at the top of the totem. The crazy thing about this is that the Great Mother was a goddess that was attached to the North Pole, but her wings were made out of ethereal flames or wings of fire. And that's how she became depicted as the Phoenix goddess in a lot of cultures. But the concept of a woman being attached to a wooden pole having wings of fire is an old spiritual concept that our ancestors revered, and it was desecrated to stop this spiritual practice of Malakam. When they attach a woman to the pole and set her on fire to burn her at the stake, it's their way of desecrating this phoenix goddess. They're trying to recreate this phoenix goddess and desecrate this spirituality. Our ancestors were practicing Malakam, and the people who conquered them wanted to stop that practice. They wanted to stop all of our old spiritual practices. So to teach women a lesson, to teach people a lesson, they burnt you to the very pole that you revered. If they caught us making the wooden totem poles and practicing Malakam, they would burn you at the stake. And the stake is nothing but the very pole that you were performing on. Our ancestors had these wooden poles everywhere, and they were practicing this. But when they were colonized, this is how they deleted this spiritual practice from our ancient societies. This is how they taught everybody a lesson and forbid them and made them cursed and desecrated. So here's a concept that I'm showing you here of the serpent goddess wrapped around the pole. The whole thing about the wings of fire and the ethereal wings of flames, or what they call the ethereal fire, if you look at this, it's shaped like a bird. Here go the great mother in the middle. She the hourglass. Remember the woman with the sexy hourglass shape? Here she is in Jainism cosmology. You can see all of the different worlds layered on each other, each a different color of the rainbow, and you can see the great mother shaping like an hourglass. And here's another representation of that. She had wings, and her wings were made of flames when they flapped. And you can see the wings flapping here as the torus field reciprocate. And you can see it's shaped like a bird. And the body of the bird would be right here in the middle, moving the chest, flapping the wings. This was personified as the phoenix goddess. So the ancestors looked at all the light of the aurora borealis as the hair of the great mother. So if you look at this collage, you can see all of those branches represent the ethereal light going to the North Pole. So even in the top right corner, the branches would be connected to the roots, and you would have this concept on the left of that of the goddess Medusa. So the reason the great mother Kali have all these different arms is because the tree of life have all these different branches. We have all these different chakra layers and ethereal bodies. So that's why you see it with all the branches and all the wings is representing all of the different chakra layers that we got. As the consciousness travel through these different layers, it's stripping itself of the veil, as they call it. You're stripping through the different layers of consciousness of reality. So this is the multi-dimensional aspect of our reality represented by the goddess slicing. Reality is split by this ethereal pole, by this goddess. Each arm represents a different version of yourself. So that's why she's slicing, and that's why it's called a stripper. That's where all of this was turned into the concept of a stripper. But I'm giving you the spirituality behind it all. It's a way we stripped ourselves through the layers of reality. And it was a practice called Malakam. And one way they forbade that practice in the ancient world was burning you on the wooden totem pole. So when you saw a woman burning on a wooden pole, she was suspended up in the air, just like you see here. You see the crowd below, and all the fire looked at like wings. And this was them desecrating the phoenix goddess. So you would associate that with death instead of life. This practice of using wooden poles and having reverence for the totem pole and the tree of life is what extended our lives and increased vitality. But after the desecration, it stopped becoming associated with life, and now it means death. at the cross, or death at the stake. That's the whole paradox of why it mean life and death. At first it meant tree of life, but after Christ it meant the tree of death. The wooden cross was associated with death. So here is the wooden cross right here, which is the great mother. So the combination of blending the woman with the wood and setting her on fire is what we're looking at here. The woman attached to the stake, and they set the fire, and that's how you get the phoenix. And again, remember how this tied to the Taurus field, because you can see the wings of the phoenix right here in the Taurus. These are the ethereal wings of fire. So the ancestors looked at all this light of the aurora borealis as the hair of the goddess. And if you would follow that north, it would all lead to this one goddess, and it would be her hair. This would be the light of the aurora borealis being sucked into the North Pole. You can see it right here, the same concept. So this is the oldest symbol in West Africa. It's called an adinkra, and it represents the great serpent goddess, the flat earth cosmology that she represents right here. As you can see, they always make the wood is very symbolic, using wood, dealing with the trees, the tree of life, the wood, right? Like Hollywood, dealing with the great mother, the wooden cross. So this is why they make this symbol in wood in West Africa. And as you look at the sacred geometry, we go back to this collage, you can see it's all the same. So when we see images like this, we could compare them to images like this now. See how the woman got her legs crossed around a pole and her arms spread? That would be the arm spread here, and the two thieves, right? Or the two legs wrapped around the pole. So the woman got her two legs wrapped around the pole and her arms spread. In Christianity, this would be Christ and the two thieves. Same thing here, Christ and the two thieves. The woman would wrap her body around the pole in this spiritual practice, and it represents how this energy current wraps itself around the North Pole. This ancient Mayan mother goddess, I showed you in this collage, you can see the goddess with all the different tree branches for her arms, and then you got the goddess Kali with all the different arms down there. But in this image, you just got the Mayan great mother sort of perched inside of the tree, attached to the tree. Now you can look at this as your meditating body with all of the chakra layers coming from it. In the middle is your body and all your chakra layers branching outward. That's what the goddess is showing us here in the ancient Mayan. But in order to desecrate this image, you would tie a woman to a wooden pole and set her on fire. The chakras around us are the ethereal flames, our twin flames, literally. Each one of them is an alternate version of yourself in another world. It's a twin, and it's truly a flame because it's ethereal light. Think about it. They say our blood is plasma. In each of these ethereal realms, your blood is slightly altered, just like that version of you. Plasma is flame, light. The light is equivalent to the DNA, which is the tree. So the branches is the flames. That's why I kept showing you the phoenix goddess. In the other cultures, they'll give you, instead of a tree, they make it flames. And the flames represent the chakra layers, where in some cultures the branches represent the different layers. Just like in government, the branches represent the different layers of government. And this is an image of, I think, the Supreme Court, where you can see the whole flat earth concept there too. And that's just a sidebar. The woman on the wooden pole with fire coming from it is dealing with the North Pole and the Great Mother immersed in the ether. But the desecration of that is, like I said, burning the woman on the stake. So if the serpent represents the serpent goddess wrapped around the pole, the concept of burning a woman at the stake, wrapping her around the sacred wooden totem, and the ropes wrapped around her, it's the whole concept of the energy wrapping around the pole. But as she burning, the fire is representative of the phoenix bird. So this was a sick ritual. When they burnt witches at the stake, they was desecrating ancient spirituality. This pole represents the stake, and the serpent wrapped around the pole is the woman. This is the ethereal wind, ethereal fire, ethereal flames. So as you can see here, if the Great Mother is spinning around with all the branches and everything, and if the roots is connected to the branches, as she spin around on her heel like a ballerina, you get this science here personified. And the heel is right here. You can see that the bottom of this thing, it shapes just like a heel. Ballerina, malakam, pole dancing, all of it has spiritual connections to it. The woman swinging around the pole can be seen right here. Like I said before, it was just reduced to stripping. It was stripping us through the ethereal layers. We were astral travelers. So all that aurora borealis light is the hair of the Great Mother. Just like we have a crown chakra creating a crown above our head made of lights. As above, so below, the earth is the same. The wood is symbolic of Mother Nature, the tree of life, the Great Mother. The desecration is the fact that they burn the women on the wood in the same ritual that we used to worship the women in the ancient day. This is how they deleted malakam from the ancient world. Nobody want to practice if this was the price to pay. Now today is being reintroduced as the strip industry. I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. That completes our documentary. Peace and much love.
We would like to thank all of our Patreons for their continued support. It means so much to us. To become a Patreon, log on to www.patreon.com/Brother Sanchez.